at the Muslims who made it to the Americas during the slavery period, we find a very sad story in one sense, that people are captured from their land. But we also find a story of great courage and resistance. And we want to look at the presence of some of the individuals. Of course, there are millions of people who actually went through experiences, but fortunately, there are some whose names have actually come to us. And from amongst these slaves and political prisoners, again, this information is coming from documents written by the slaves, from eyewitness reports, autobiographies, so many different ways that it comes to us. From amongst them is Muhammad Kaaba. And Muhammad Kaaba was from Buka, Malinke, Guinea, that's West Africa. He was studying to be a judge, and he was captured at 20 years old and deported to Jamaica. So this is a recorded individual whose name we can follow and whatnot to bring you this information. Abu Bakr Siddiqa was a cleric or a scholar from Timbuktu. He was from Timbuktu. He was captured and taken to Jamaica in 1834. Francois Macandal was born in Guinea. He was a marabout, or a scholar murabit, who led a slave revolt that made the great revolution in Haiti. Haiti, remember Hispaniola, which is now Dominican Republic and Haiti. There, on the French side, the African Muslims were leading the revolts against the French. And there were two in particular, one whose name was Francois Macandal, and another whose name is Bookman. And so both of these are recorded as being what they call marabout, which we say in Arabic, we say murabit. So they were scholars who would travel around and organize people. They call them marabout in West Africa. And so they organized revolts on the plantation. And Toussaint Louverture, who was an African slave who eventually got educated, and he studied, and he actually had military skills. He was a general, trained to be a general. He took over and organized the revolt started by the Muslims, and the Haitians were the first to actually liberate themselves in the Western world. The first society. And they're still suffering from this up until today because they put sanctions on them. They boycotted them and put sanctions because they were so strong. The shahid here, the key point is that the revolts were initially led by Muslims. And that's not known by a lot of people. Salih Bilali was captured at 14 years old in Jenne. This is on the Niger River. He was taken from Jenne. He was riding from Jenne to Kiana. He spent 60 years in slavery on the St. Simon's Island in Georgia. Bilali Muhammad, former cleric or scholar, enslaved on Sapelo Island, Georgia, in the early 1800s. O. Lizzie Gray, a Muslim woman, this is recorded, and we put it in the book Deeper Roots. O. Lizzie Gray, she died in South Carolina. Now, they claim that she had converted to Christianity. And the missionaries like to play with Muslims and make them do things. So they said to her, tell us about Christ. Okay, now, she's resisting them. And she's going to say her opinion, but in hidden language. She said, Christ built the first church in Mecca, and his grave was there. Now, does that sound like Christ to you? Again, remember now, this is mixed up things, but who do you think she's talking about? Right, but who's talking about Christ? Who she's talking about? Right, you see, actually she meant Medina, right, not Mecca. But you see, they're talking in different symbols. But the fact that, you know, the first church, meaning the Prophet's mosque, his grave is there, she meant Medina, right? But the point is, though, she's resisting, right? This is her answer to the missionaries when they're asking her about Christ. Fatima or Phoebe, she was the wife of Bilali Muhammad, and she was well known in the Sapelo Islands. I want to read you a couple of reports, just so you can actually hear the words coming out of the documents, not my words. In Jamaica, half of the imported slaves who came to Jamaica were from the Senegambia and Gold Coast. And there was a special magistrate. His name was Robert Madden. Now, he was sent to Jamaica in order to help in the transition from slavery to indentured labor. We're going to talk about indentured labor soon. But they wanted to, British wanted to abolish slavery. So they sent Robert Madden there to Jamaica. And he actually discovered the presence of a considerable amount of Muslims in Jamaica. And he actually recorded their names. And this is one of his reports. He said, I had a visit one Sunday morning very lately from 3 Mandingo Negroes, natives of Africa. Now, when they talk generally about Muslims, the strong Muslims, they came Mandingo. This is page 46. They say Mandingo. The Mandingo are the Mande. You remember Mali, right? And Mansa Abu Bakr, who came in the 2,000 ships? They are Mandingos. So this is a well, grounded group, strong group of West Africans. So he used this name, Mandingo Negroes, natives of Africa. Then Madden continues. He said they could all read and write Arabic. Now, Madden had served in Turkey for the British, so he knew how to write Arabic. He knew something about Muslims. So he said these slaves here could all read and write Arabic. One of them showed me a Qur'an written from memory by himself. But written, he assured me, before he became a Christian. See, they have to hide, right? But he still got his Qur'an. He wrote the whole Qur'an from his memory. So he's an alim, right? How many of us can write the Qur'an from our memory? Even so-called scholars, right? So he continues. I had doubts on this point, that he was a Christian. One of them, Benjamin Cochran, a free Negro who practiced with no little success as a doctor in Kingston, was in the habit of coming to me on Sunday. His history is that of hundreds of others in Jamaica. Cochran said his father was a chief in the Mandingo country. He was sent to school, but was too idle a boy to become a scholar. Plenty of books in the Mandingo country, but not much schools. The great schools are farther up country. He began to learn to be a doctor in Mandingo country. I, Madden, have not the time to give you an account of his religious opinions, but though very singular, they were expressed with infinitely more energy and eloquence than his sentiments on other subjects. Okay? Now, this is where he continues. He professed to be an occasional follower of one of the sectarian ministers here, meaning Christians, and so did each of his 2 friends. I had my doubts thereupon. I expressed them to my wife, who was present on this occasion, and told her to prepare for a demonstration of Mahometanism. Remember the name Mahomet? There it is. Whenever you see Mahomet, that is a name they use for Muhammad. They're talking about Muslims. So he tells his wife, I'm going to give them a demonstration. I took up a book as if by accident and commenced repeating the well-known Muslim salam to the Prophet of Allah, Muhammad Rasulullah. In an instant, I had a Muslim trio, long and loud. My Negro neophytes were chanting their names with irrepressible fervor, and Benjamin Cochran, I thought, would have inflicted the whole of this precipitous book, meaning the Quran of his book of Islam, on me, if I had not taken advantage for giving him and his companions a reproof for pretending. So what he did was, he got the people together. He knew that they were not Christians. He's a British magistrate sent to Jamaica, and he's finding the presence of a lot of Muslims in Jamaica. So he finds Arabic on these people. So he says, okay, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's what he tells them, right? Then they all start reading Quran, and they thought he was a Muslim, right? Then he told them, be quiet. I caught you. Okay, so this was Madden's report. So this is interesting now, how he's finding out. Now, Kaaba, one of them, the Muhammad Kaaba, his wife got a document in her hand called Wathiqa, al-Wathiqa. And this Wathiqa actually led to a great revolt in the Manchester parish of Jamaica in 1820-21. There was a 21-22, there was a major revolt in Manchester, in this section of Jamaica. And we have actually been trying to find this wathiqa, because it is right around that time, just earlier, a great West African scholar named Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, rahimullah, in the Sokoto Khilafat. He wrote a document called Wathiqa Ibn Fudi ila Ahl Sudan. And this wathiqa was a call to rebellion and a call for the Muslims to now take over the land of northern Nigeria, Hausa land, and the Sokoto lands. So this, and so in West Africa they call it al-wathiqa, right? So this document in Jamaica, they're calling it wathiqa, and it caused the revolt. And if you read the wathiqa that Ibn Fudi, Sheikh Uthman Danfodio wrote, it is a call, to struggle and jihad. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so the connection is there. Another interesting report, and I want to read this to you so you can actually hear the African Muslims talking. This is Abu Bakr Siddiq. He was known as Edward Dooland. And this is part of his autobiography. He said, "My name is Abu Bakr Siddiq, born in Timbuktu and brought up in Jenne. I acquired the knowledge of Qur'an in the country of Guna, in which there are many teachers for my people. My father's name is Kara Musa Sharif. Some of the Guna's people were obliged to flee to Kong, and on that day they made me captive. As soon as I was made prisoner, they stripped me, tied me with a cord, gave me a heavy load to carry, led me into the country of Buntuku, from thence to the country of Kumasi, where the king of the Ashanti, that this is Ghana, the king of the Ashanti reigned, whose name was Ashai, and from thence to Asikuma, from thence to Agimasa, where the country of the Fantis, and from thence to the town of Dago by the seaside. There they sold me to the Christians." Now this is a person who was a scholar from Timbuktu, right, who was captured. He said, "They sold me to the Christians in that town. We were there 3 months at sea before we arrived in Jamaica, which was the beginning of bondage. I have none to thank but those that brought me here, but praise be to Allah, who has everything in his power to do as he thinks good. And no man can remove whatever burden he chooses to put on us. And as he said, nothing shall fall upon us except what he shall ordain. He is our Lord, and let all that believe in him put their trust in him." He's quoting from the Qur'an. Now Abu Bakr continues. He said, "My parents' religion is Islam. They are all circumcised, and their devotions are 5 times a day. They fast in Ramadan, they give tribute according to the law. They are married to 4 wives, but the 5th is an abomination to them. They fight for their religion. They travel to Hijaz. They don't eat any meat except what they kill themselves. They do not drink wine nor spirits, as it is held an abomination so to do. They do not associate with any that worship idols, or profane the Lord's name, or do dishonor to their parents, or commit murder, or bear false witness, or are covetous, proud, or boastful. For such faults are an abomination unto my religion. They are particularly careful in the education of their children and in their behavior. But I am lost to all these advantages. Since my bondage I am become corrupt, and I now conclude by begging the Almighty God to lead me into the path which is proper for me. For he alone knows the secrets of my heart and what I am in need of." Abu Bakr Siddiq, Kingston, Jamaica, 1834. 1834. That's a Muslim, clear. You see his narrative of Islam, he has a perfect, beautiful narration in those short words of what Islam is, what his background is, and he found himself in slavery. These are the witnesses. These are the reports that we're getting now. It's a big thing that's coming to the surface. And so when you look at some of these documents, you will even see sometimes there are pictures. This is a picture of Ayub ibn Sulaiman. They call him Job ben Solomon. He is a typical Fulani man of the Fulah, of the Futa Jalan. This is in West Africa. And he was a scholar, and he was taken as a slave, and immediately he's writing Arabic. And his master was an educated person. So he saw that he was not ready for hard work, and he made him as an accountant. But when it came clear how educated this person was, he informed the authorities about him. Now, there was a treaty between the United States and the Sultan of Morocco, because the Moroccans in Maghreb, they were the first country to recognize the United States. This is an interesting point. Morocco was the first country to recognize, and George Washington, his letter is actually there, writing to the Sultan. So the agreement was, any Muslim from Morocco, from, his area was North Africa, any of the Muslim who was captured should be immediately let free. So according to that agreement, Ayub ibn Sulaiman, he was freed from slavery. He went to Washington, D.C. Eventually, he went to London. He met officials in London, and he returned to West Africa, where he eventually passed away, but he was able to go home. That's how his writings look. He wrote the whole Qur'an from his memory. He wrote, portions of the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. He was a great scholar. Also, you have Abdurrahman as-Sori. And you can see the writing in the picture here. It says, right on the bottom, you see it? Ismuhu Abdurrahman. Okay, so this is his own writing now that you see. And there is a book for those of you who want to do further study. It is written by Terry Alford, A-L-F-O-R-D. Right? It's called Prince Among Slaves. If you go online and PBS, Prince Among Slaves, you can also get a DVD, a docudrama of his life. Very interesting docudrama of his life. Now, this document here on the right, this is written by a Christian missionary. And it's saying in that document here, it says that this page, basically he's saying, was written by Prince Abdurrahman. At my request, I asked him to write the Lord's Prayer in Arabic. Because the missionaries like to make fun of Muslims and, have things like a trophy, right? So this man's got a trophy here. And he put it in his book, The Lord's Prayer in Arabic. Okay? This is what Abdurrahman wrote. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. He wrote the Fatiha. Right? Because the Christian didn't know, right? He can't read Arabic. If it was, he was supposed to read, if he was really honest, the Lord's Prayer is, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Rabbuna alladhi fis samawat. He would have written something like this. But he didn't. He put the Fatiha. That's resistance, right? That one day somebody would come along and then read this and see how this man was resisting them. He's given dawah too, right? Eventually, inshallah, somebody would read that it was actually the Fatiha that he wrote. This is Yaro Mahmud. He is considered the patriarch of the Muslim Americans in slavery. He spent about 70 years in slavery. He died at 120. About 70 years in slavery. Okay, and he still has a very peaceful look about him. This is Yaro Mahmud. Umar bin Sayyid. Umar bin Sayyid. He was a scholar. He wrote his autobiography in Arabic and many other books, and his documents are available now. There is an Islamic museum in Jackson, Mississippi, and they house his documents, and they take these documents around the country where you can actually see the documents written by somebody in the slavery period there in Arabic language. These are how some of the documents are looking. And they're coming up all over the place. Around the United States, Salih Bilali coming out of the Gula Islands off the coast of the Carolinas. Now in Brazil, the documents are coming up in Brazil, which is something amazing happening in the Bahia section of Brazil. Is Salvador is the major area. and the documents are coming to the surface. A very interesting issue when you look for the documents, if you ever get into the field, I'll show you, I did some research myself, and I went to the Nassau Public Library. And there in the Nassau Public Library, I went to the librarian and I said, "Do you have anything written in Arabic by the slaves?" She said, "No, but we do have some Amharic." Amharic is Ethiopian language, right? Because the people in the Caribbean, they like Ethiopian Rasta, you know, the Rasta thing. So she said, "We do have some Amharic." So I said, "Can I see the Amharic, please?" So she brought it out, and it was Surat al-Falaq, Surat al-Nas. He was seeking refuge from the shaitan, right? In Arabic. But they didn't know the difference. And I showed her, this is Arabic. This is not Amharic. And the person who was writing this was actually a Muslim. Then we went further, and we found a report, very interesting report. I'll read it to you so you can actually hear it. It said in 1802, Mr. Reverend Rose, he's a missionary and a slave owner in the Bahamas chain. Okay? In 1802, Mr. Rose moved his residence to Exuma. That's an island in the Bahamas chain. On Christmas Day, dedicated the new church. After having officiated so long in old uninhabited houses in the Long Island, he felt in the discharge of his duty under a consecrated house a renovation, as it were, of clergymen. The inhabitants, now he's talking about the inhabitants of Exuma. The inhabitants then consisted of 140 whites, 35 free people, and 1,078 Negro and other slaves. On his first coming, many of the Negroes called themselves the followers of Mahomet. Look at this. They call themselves the followers of Mahomet. But these, with other blacks, he baptized to the number of 93 adults and 41 infants in less than 1 year. So the shahid here is, they call themselves followers of Muhammad. Now when they write it, they say Mahomet. M-A-H-O-M-E-T. Whenever you see that name, that is the Crusaders' name, medieval name, that they used against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, trying to say he was a devil worshipper. But what this report tells us is that the majority of the people on this island, a good percentage, they're Muslims on the island. They're clearly calling themselves Muslims. So you find reports like this all over the place. In Guyana, Guyana has 3 parts. There is British Guyana, Dutch Guyana, and French Guyana. In the Dutch section called Suriname, there was a great slave revolt there, and the leader, his name was Arabi, and his general was called Zamzam, like Zamzam water, right? And they opened up the middle of Suriname. They called them Bush Blacks, and they opened it up and maintained that territory, and the Suriname government had to make like a treaty with them because they could not conquer them on the interior. And so these were Muslims who led this revolt. And now, alhamdulillah, there are many Surinamis from that same area who are actually returning to Islam now. This is an interesting story. They're returning to Islam. In Jamaica, there was a section of Jamaica. Now you can see there are a lot of Muslims in Jamaica. But there was a section controlled by a group called Maroons. And the Maroons, and this name comes from Spanish. The Spanish call them from Cimarrones, which means a wild horse. Because these were the African slaves who escaped slavery, and they went into the interior, and the Spanish could not touch them. So anytime the slaves were strong enough, they would go into the interior until they controlled the whole inner section of Jamaica. These are the Maroons. The British, being very crafty, they made a treaty with them. And they gave them their own, let them have their own constitution. And up until now, the Maroons have some separate laws in the interior of Jamaica that is there. And there are Qur'ans that were found up there in Maroon country. So they were Muslims, and there were other groups as well, Ashanti and other groups, very strong groups, Yoruba. But, you know, it's interesting that we find, again, Muslims, and we find the roots in this region here. So the Muslims then, so many documents come to the surface. It's a lot of work can be done on these documents, very interesting things that are there. 3 points: the legacy of the Muslims in the slavery period. There's 3 ways you could distinguish the Muslim slaves from the other slaves. One is Tawheed, that they had belief in one God. And it was hard for them to accept the Trinity or to accept Jesus as God, and they were not people, who had many different idols. Tahara, the second is Tahara, that they had purity of mind, body, and spirit. And the third is Al-Amru bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi al-Munkar. They would call to the good and forbid evil. So these are the 3 real points of legacy that you find amongst the early Muslims who were in this situation of slavery. And the legacy continues. And many of you have heard of Malcolm X before, right? You usually see him in a suit with a bow tie and whatever. That's Malcolm X. That's one of his last pictures. And you see him, he's got the clothes of ulama, of scholars, right? What is he wearing? What does he have in his hand? He has the book, right? The Qur'an, education is what he is talking about. And as part of the last things that he had done, along with making the Organization of African Unity, he also started Muslim Mosque Incorporated in New York, and many of the Ahl Sunnah Jamaats that came later on after Malcolm's time, were influenced, by what he did in breaking from the Nation of Islam. And we'll talk more about that later, inshallah, in the course. But this is the legacy now that Malcolm was getting onto, right, to go back to the roots, right? This is what we call deeper roots, right? The deeper roots is actually Islam. And this is still impacting on people up until today. So I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have concerning this issue of the deeper roots in the slavery period now. Floor is open for any questions that you may have. There's a mic here. You can take that because we're doing a recording, and so we'd like to hear your voice. Actually, anybody who makes a comment, and we'd like to hear your voice.
So you talked about the misconception that the Arabs were selling the slaves to the Europeans, and I see that on a lot of comments online and stuff like that.
That's right.
So what was the primary way that the Europeans captured slaves again? If you could just repeat that, because I kind of missed that.
Yeah, basically the ports of call, as we saw in the map, were basically West Africa by Senegal, Gambia, and below Nigeria, and all the way down to Angola, right? It's that western side of Africa. The Arabs did not penetrate that side. There are no Arabs down on that side. The Arabs stopped at the desert. You'll find some in Mauritania and in the Sahara desert region, but they did not penetrate down into West Africa. What actually happened is that the main way of slavery was prisoners of war. And so the European ships, parked on the coastline, and then they would negotiate with the winners of a battle and say, okay, you have prisoners of war, we'll buy them from you. So instead of integrating them into your society like they used to do, they would sell them because it didn't matter to them. They were prisoners of war, and they would get valuable goods. And so they started like this. Then they built forts, and they started to organize people from the forts. Then they started working with tribes to raid slaves. And they would raid in certain sections against their enemies, and they would take it to the people in the fort, and then the boats would come and they take them across. So it's something like that. What happened in the Arab world is that slaves did come. Some of the slaves went across the desert, not many because it's difficult to cross a desert. Some went across the desert to Morocco and places like that in North Africa. It's a much smaller number. Also on the east coast of Africa, the Portuguese came in and they conquered the area, but that the people in East Africa from ancient times were called Swahili. And the Swahili is the language of Sawahil, the coastline. They were a mixture of Yemenis with Bantu Africans. They make up what they call Swahilis. Okay, that's along the coast. The Swahilis originally did not raid for slaves. There was gold in Zimbabwe and in Malawi and these interiors. They were traders. When the Portuguese came, Vasco da Gama, remember when the Portuguese came, they started raiding for slaves. And a group came from Arabia called the Omanis. The Omanis came and they worked with the Swahilis and they defeated the Portuguese. But the Omanis got weak. And they decided, they saw the value in the slave trade. So they set up their base of operations in Zanzibar, and they raided for slaves, and they sold the slaves. But the numbers were very small numbers compared to the Atlantic slave trade. It's like 1,000 to 1 compared to the Atlantic slave trade. What they do now in academia, they try to make the eastern side as much as the western side. So they say, okay, well, you Muslims talk about Atlantic slave trade. What about your slave trade? And I was in a debate with one of these so-called scholars. And he was saying the number of slaves that went from the east side into the Arab world is the same number as went to America. You're talking millions now. Okay, we're on a public radio station. And I said to him, if you are correct, then where are the slaves? Where are the descendants? I can tell you where my descendants are. In Brazil, the most population, big population Africans, the Caribbean, the United States. I can show you the descendants. Where in the Arab world can you see the descendants of Africans? Don't tell me the Sudan, because they were already Africans. Right? Don't tell me Egypt. There's already been Upper Egypt. It's already African. Okay, where are they? Saudi Arabia? A few here and there. Kuwait? Emirates? Where are they? There would have to be a huge population, right? If you're talking about 30, 40 million people brought into the area, then you would see a huge population of African people in the Arab world. I don't see them. Right? And then he got quiet because he could not defend his point. He's lying. We're not going to say it didn't happen. It did happen. And it's against Shari'ah. As we learned earlier, it's against Islamic law to raid for slaves. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if a person captures an individual, makes him a slave, and benefits from him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look at him on the Day of Judgment. So this is completely against our religion to do this. But Muslims got weak like other people and got involved. But it was nothing to the extent of Atlantic slave trade, you see? And this is what they try to use against us. Because in the Muslim world, slavery, it was not ball and chain slavery where you whip them and you can't, rise up. One of the richest people in the world history, his name is Harun al-Rashid of the Abbasids. You probably heard of him before, right? His mother was a slave, a Persian slave. One of the famous Abbasid Khalifas, his name is Ma'mun, right? His mother was Turkish slave. So that's not slavery like somebody in a field, right? It's completely different. So that's why we use the term controlled bonded servitude. You see? Bonded servitude when we're dealing with Islam. Let me see, is there any questions over here on the sister side? Anybody? Okay, comment. Can you give them the mic? Give the brother the mic.
Say that the slaves in North America and South America were considered chattel slaves, which is quite a difference from the other type of slavery. In chattel slavery, you were like an animal, or like a keg of molasses, or you're like a herd of chickens or cows. So your humanity was taken away. And I think the big thing that we need to understand about slavery in North America and South America was the dehumanization of the people who they took in slavery. So no longer did you have any connection with being a human being. You were not a human being. And this is why you could be treated any way you wanted to be treated, any way they wanted you to be treated, and you had nothing to say about it. And don't forget, this happened, as you were saying, for 300 years. So as you develop any type of trade or any type of business, over the period of time, you'll get more sophisticated in how you do that trade and how you treat those people and how you are able to have plantations of thousands of people and keep them from revolting. So slavery becomes an economic institution. And you know, when you dehumanize people under an economic condition, that's why you could see what they were able to do over a period of time.
That's right. And we are still suffering from this in our society. And it's something which, you know, has to, you know, be rooted out of the people. And this is where, you know, as Muslims, you know, we are holding keys for the solution of, you know, coming out of this. Another question.
Just a question.
Yeah, question?
Yeah. Understanding that a lot of African Caribbean, most of them now being a Christian, they may not probably understand their background or root. Is there any effective or a large way of to explaining them or giving them dawah to at least to go back to the deep roots or understanding, especially nowadays with negativity that we see in the media about Islam,
Right.
one form to another. These people, they may probably know their ancestors 4 or 5 generations
Yeah.
could be Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
but they see it in the media and all that, they may probably, you know what, they will have a negative impact. So is there any way that could be done? Or
Yes,
done
I mean,
anything?
this really is where the issue of deeper roots, of discussing, you know, the lineage and the background, this is one good method of taking the veils off the eyes of African Americans, African Caribbean, Afro-Canadian, when it comes to Islam, because it's a lineage thing, it's a root. And most people, most African people from this part of the world have a search for their background. You see, if you come from a country where you know your language, you know your customs and culture, you know your lineage, you don't even worry about that's nesab. That's what we call nesab in Arabic. But if you don't know your nesab, then there's something missing in your personality. So there is a search for nesab, genealogy, lineage, amongst African Americans. I say the whole of the Americas. And this is where the issue of deeper roots, you know, as a subject, you know, has, you know, one of the ways that has attracted, you know, many people to Islam, you know, in this way, as well as the natural call of Tawheed that is there. And despite the media, despite what you see on the surface, there are still many African Americans and Hispanics who are actually embracing Islam. Up until now, it has not really stopped the number. It's made things negative, but it has not stopped people from still entering into Islam. Because this is roots now. This is a lineage. And you can't hold people back from finding who their families are. And so this is where the issue of Malcolm X that comes up every year. This February is Black History Month. And so now in this time, people talking about Malcolm X. Look at Malcolm X. So you don't even have to say the word Islam. Just look at him. Right? And that tells you Islam. And so this is one of the best ways, I think, in order to break the ice, you know, to take the veils off of negativity, you know, and then get the person interested in Islam. And many of the tribes, and you would be surprised our connections, the 2 leading tribes probably that led the revolts were the Mandingos and the Fulani. And the Fulani are also called Fulla, right? And so those of you from Guyana, right, and we're going to talk about this later, many Indian Muslims who came here, when the Hindus or the other people want to make fun of them, they say, you Fulla man, you Mandingo. Now they didn't realize what it is. Some until now, right, when they realize what they're calling them, because when the Africans were there before any of the other immigrants came, right, they were the Fulanis. It is the Fulla and the Mandingo that were leading the revolts. So they want to say something negative on a person, they say you are Fulla or you are Mandingo. But it's actually a name of pride for us because these are the Muslim nations coming out of West Africa. So next week, inshallah, we're going to look at the abolition of slavery, the end of it, and then a new period called indentured labor. And in this period, we'll see a new wave of Muslims coming in from India and from Indonesia, who came into the Americas. And that's another very interesting subject. And inshallah, we'll see you again for the next class. Billahi tawfiq. Have a safe journey home. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.